Good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you for joining the National Academy of Education and the Equity Assistance Center South at the Southern Education Foundation for the first webinar in a three-part series addressing supportive learning environments for belonging and deeper learning. I'm Amy Berman, the Deputy Director of the National Academy of Education. Today, after introducing our speakers, we will begin with an overview of the Equity Assistance Center South, or EX South, and the webinar series that the EX South and the Academy are partnering to present. We will then hear from Dr. Mary Helen Imordino Yang as she describes the research basis behind the importance of creating supportive learning environments. She will then engage in a dialogue with educators and school leaders to discuss how they are bridging this critical research with practice in their classrooms and schools. Finally, we will save time for questions and answers from all of you. Please feel free to add questions to the Q&A button throughout the presentation, and we will get to as many of them as we can. And again, it's really important if you could try to put these in the Q&A button because it will be much easier to find than in the chat. Thank you. These are our speakers. Mary Helen Imordino Yang is the Fami-Ndana Adala Professor of Humanistic Psychology and a Professor of Education Psychology and Neuroscience at the University of Southern California. She is the founding director of the USC Center for Affective Neuroscience Development, Learning, and Education, or USC CANDLE. Dr. Imordino Yang has pioneered novel approaches to the study of social, emotional, and brain development with implications for educational practice and policy. She was elected to the National Academy of Education in 2023 and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2025. She's also a former 7th grade public school science teacher. Samantha O'Connor is a high school chemistry teacher in Nashville, Tennessee. Her career began 10 years ago in Metro Nashville Public Schools, and she now teaches at Harpeth Hall, an all-girls independent school. Through a career that has spanned diverse classroom contexts and working environments, Samantha has worked to figure out how to make chemistry relevant and engaging for all students. Her teacher preparation program at Vanderbilt University and her time spent with the Knowles Teaching Fellowship has helped her discover and develop effective instructional practices for science education that transcend the variability that exists within classrooms and between schools. Matthew Nunez is a high school social studies teacher at Da Vinci Rise, a hybrid independent study school in Los Angeles, California, designed to support youth experiencing foster care, housing instability, probation, and other barriers to education that often disrupt traditional schooling. Peter Karp is the principal of the Institute for Collaborative Education, a New York City public school known for its collaborative culture, commitment to equitable access, and admissions model that reserves half of its seats for students from low-income backgrounds. He previously taught science at the school for 10 years. His school is a member of a New York State consortium pioneering the development of performance-based assessment tasks. Pete is committed to fostering a collaborative and supportive school environment in which high expectations are set for all and significant trust and autonomy is granted to teachers in their design of curriculum and to students in their choices within the inquiry-led learning experiences. Ishay Collins leads the Equity Assistance Center South at the Southern Education Foundation, where she oversees the center's operations and works with public school districts across 11 southern states and DC to address long-standing educational disparities. A civil rights attorney and former elementary school educator, she brings a wide range of experiences to the EX South, holding such roles as current Atlanta City Council member, former chair of the Atlanta Board of Education, the senior director of programs for the education nonprofit Jumpstart, senior program director for the Georgia State University College of Education, among others. I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Collins now to talk about the Equity Assistance Center South.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. I truly appreciate you. The EX South, as always, is proud to partner with the National Academy of Education, especially for this important webinar series And so during today's presentation, you may hear us refer to the Equity Assistance South as either EAC South, like I just did, or simply the EAC. And so who we are. We are one of the 4 regional technical assistance centers across the nation, federally funded by the U.S. Department of Education. And what we do, we provide universal, targeted, and intensive technical assistance to support and address issues of equity while advising and serving public school districts and their organizations in their work for more opportunities for students, particularly in the areas of race, national origin, sex, and religion as required by law. The great thing about our services as a TA center for school districts, school boards, and agencies is that it is free of charge. And so we don't charge anything for our assistance in partnership with the National Academy of Education, and would love for you all to request request our assistance. And so who do we support? We serve the 11 states in the South, including Washington, D.C., and you can see the map to your left, bottom left. Our region is home to 128 of the 128 remaining open federal school desegregation cases. So we are available to provide desegregation technical assistance in that area as well. We support the 4.5 million Black students, which is more than 60% of the 7.4 million Black students in public schools nationwide, and 42% of the nation's English language learners, of which about 2/3 of the population live in Texas and Florida alone. And so we share this data set to understand the magnitude of our work, but also for you all to know that there is a free technical assistance center with the expertise to address these issues for you. And so now I will turn it back over to Amy, who will facilitate today's discussion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ishay. As I mentioned earlier, this is the first in a 3-part series. We will be recording this and we will be sharing all of them after the presentations. Student academic achievement is predicated on numerous factors, including a safe and supportive learning environment. When learning environments, instructional strategies, and curricula support psychological safety, predictability, deep conceptual understanding, and purposeful engagement, students are better able to attend, persist, reason, and learn. Learning is shaped by how cognition, emotion, attention, and social interaction work together, and learning environments can either support or disrupt these processes. This webinar lays the foundation of supportive learning environments for belonging and deeper learning. Our next webinar will address the district and school level policies and systems needed to make supportive learning environments a reality for all students. And our final webinar will focus on concrete instructional practices that are critical to building co-constructed supportive learning environments. It will help to clarify how day-to-day instructional choices shape learning conditions in classrooms. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Imardino Yang.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen. All right, are you seeing the screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today and for all the work you do on behalf of America's children. It's quite an extraordinary task to educate our children for the future, and you are right in the heart of it. So I'm going to jump straight in and talk to you about some of the very basic science that we and other people have been doing for the last 20 years or so that really is changing the way that we understand the nature of learning itself, and what that means for the design of school environments. And the basic idea that we're coming to over and over again across fields of science that are dealing with the human condition is that human beings are not, even though science aims to divide people up into small different systems and different kinds of capacities and different abilities that we can do things. We have math scores, we have English scores, we have language learning ability, these different things. We carve people up into these components. But you know, as educators, that you don't have, a super marginal gyrus and reading ability scores walking into your room. You have a whole child who brings with them the entirety of their experience. And you are charged with helping that child grow themselves through the opportunities that school can provide and grow themselves in ways that enable them to participate in society productively, ethically, in ways that are self-fulfilling for them and that reflect the kinds of strengths and proclivities and capacities that they're capable of developing. And so what we're really going to talk about today, just briefly, is a kind of tour through the science of emotions, brain development, and effective teaching, and really look at the ways that the brain is not fragmented into pieces, but a whole people exist in classrooms and what that means for the way we design our educational systems. So I'm just going to start with this song that was written by my baby daughter when she was 6 in kindergarten, and it's literally just a picture that she drew of herself there with crayon. I just took a picture of it. And we've got a little music stand and she's singing, and I'll just read it to you. Don't try to read it, but I won't sing to you though. She says, "Oh, Teddy," Teddy's her little brother, Theodore. "Oh, Teddy, we love you more than the whole earth size. As the earth spins every day, we love you as much as usual, but sometimes even more as you make us proud and happy that you're you." Right? So what a lovely little song about this girl's feelings, her understandings of the world, her rudimentary invented spellings, her ability to start to express herself in writing through music. But I have a simple question for you. Is this a song about this little girl's love of her baby brother, or is this a song of her budding interest in planetary science? Right? Human beings leverage our experiences in the social world, in a body, through our social relationships and our cultural ways of knowing, and we bring those to bear on the ways that we experience things, even things that you might consider academic learning or proto-academic or scholarly skills. We don't do things in silos. This young girl has experienced this amazing sense of awe, learning that we're on this gigantic ball of dirt flinging through space, orbiting around this star that's shining on us and spinning as we do that. And as the star shines on one side, we get lit up, and we call that daytime. And then we're spinning around the other way, and we get around the other side, and the star doesn't shine on us anymore because we're being blocked by the ball of dirt, and we call that nighttime. And she's completely in awe of that and trying to wrap her head around how magnificent that is and what it really means. And at the same time, she's experiencing, having a baby brother that she is so connected to and so wanting to help take care of, that she really felt like was her brother, one of those kids. And she put those two things together because to her, I would argue, they felt somehow the same. And this really reveals to us the nature of the learning process itself. Learning is not just about the content or the transactional ways in which we exchange information. It's about the way in which we make each other feel, and then the ways in which we construct meaning and share and formalize that meaning across those feeling spaces. And what we're finding is that even for the most academic kind of learning, like in this case for this little girl, learning how to write, right, how to spell things, she actually experiences and leverages that skill in the context of a bigger, more meaningful for her story that's deeply emotional about her life, who she is, her family. And that doesn't stop when you go to school in the later grades, all the way into high school, even post-secondary. It really seems to be that the science is pointing us toward a serious paradigm shift. We can conceptualize the solar system as us being in the middle, looking up at the sun going by to make this sunset. That's not incorrect. But in order to do that, you have to make a lot of adjustments and try to figure out why Mars is going retrograde sometimes and where this comet thing is coming from going the totally wrong direction. And those things don't fit into our model of outcomes and progressions that we expect to see. When we reframe the model so that we shift our perspective fundamentally so that the sun is in the middle and we too are going around, all of a sudden, many things that before were difficult to explain and required a lot of extra fitting of the model now become much more parsimoniously congruent with what you would expect. And so what is the center of the model for education? I would argue that the middle needs to be, the thing we're all orbiting around needs to be the experience of thinking, what it feels like subjectively to think here with these people about this content. Because what our and many other people's science is showing is that it's the feeling of thinking that actually determines how opportunities to learn shape development over time, what you're capable of over time, how you potentiate yourself, what you do next, what you're positioned to do throughout your life, and even your brain development. So I'm going to share with you a quick video of us from Nova, which is a science television show, which features our lab and features one of the young people who participated in a longitudinal 5-year study of teenagers that we did in Los Angeles, just because it gives you a sense of how these experiments are done. We actually sit with young people. We've done this with adults too. We've done it around the world in different places. But we sit with people and we talk to them about how they understand real things that are happening in the world around them, the sense they make of those. And then we, on the basis of those kinds of understandings, we can analyze what happens when we then move them into an MRI scanner and ask them to think again about these complex issues and stories and things they're learning and tell us in real time how they feel about them. And we can look at these generative processes of making meaning and link those to brain developmental processes that are associated with all kinds of outcomes that we most care about for our young people. So I'm going to play this for you. It's just a couple minutes.
The sound isn't working, I don't think.
The sound's not working?
No.
All right, let me try it again. I'm going to stop share. Okay, I can fix it. Thanks for telling me. I'll do this again. Oh, it's not allowing me to share the sound. That's the problem. I don't know if the person controlling this can turn it on like it was before. But if not, we'll just go ahead without the video.
Soraya, what would you like her to do?
Can we move forward without the video?
All right, are you seeing this? Okay, so I'm just going to talk you through quickly. I'm not going to play it all. I'm just going to go like this and show you. So basically, young people come to the lab and they sit with me for 2 hours. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Sit with me for 2 hours, and they also talk to other people from the lab about all kinds of things they've witnessed in their life, who they want to be someday, how they understand the world, the way they're parented, their ideas for how to make the world better, all these kinds of things. But one of the things they do is they sit with me for 2 hours and talk about a series of 40 true documentary stories about real teenagers' lives from around the world. And they just answer the question, how does this person's story make you feel? And there are all kinds of complex issues that are invoked by the stories, and we just want the kids to think about those and to tell us what they mean to them. And so a young person comes and sits with us, they answer, they talk about things. This young girl is watching a video of Malala in Pakistan when she's 12. She's talking with her dad about how she wants to be a doctor someday, and but the Taliban forbid her to go to school, and that she'll go to school here, there, or anywhere. They can't stop her. And then we just stop the video, and I ask Acela, how does this person's story make you feel? And she talks about the way that she thinks about it, and then we move her into the MRI scanner here, and she's shown the stories again as she lays inside the scanner, and we're measuring brain activity as she's there. telling us in real time, I'm deeply moved and engaged with what I'm thinking about, versus, I'm not that much moved by this one. And known, unbeknownst to her, right, there are stories mixed in that are not meant to be as compelling. So that she can sort of engage with real stories of real teenagers, some of which there's a lot to learn from, and some of which are sort of more ordinary. But it's up to her what she thinks about them. And then she comes out and we talk to her again. And okay. So hopefully you got a little bit of a sense from that. So what we find in the brain is what my little nephew was showing here, that emotionally engaged thinking, when people are telling us in real time, including teenagers, I'm really engaged with what I'm thinking about. This seems like a very important thing for me to be thinking about and learning about, and it has all kinds of meaning for me. What we see is that we get activations in brain systems that are far below the level of conscious awareness. So, we used to think from the 1960s, there was a theory of brain where you get kind of a reptilian brain and then a so-called, limbic brain that does emotion. And on top of that, you get this big cortex that's doing all the rational stuff. And what, so much science is showing us now is that that is completely not the way it works. In fact, what we find is that when people are deeply engaged with thinking about important ideas that they find very powerful and moving, we see activity in systems that are also responsible for feeling and regulating very basic survival related mechanisms, such as breathing when you're asleep, or feeling the way your lunch is being digested, or feeling your heart pounding or beating and knowing if you're out of breath. These kinds of very basic physiological life-related processes are being invoked and repurposed in the service of thinking in things that really matter. And this is why meaningful learning always involves emotion. It's also why, you feel like you have butterflies in your stomach when you're nervous about something that's in the social world, or you feel like you have your heart pounding when you're frightened, right? Because you're feeling these embodied sensations as a part of the meaning you're making of the situation. And what we show is that the way young people engage this kind of embodied thinking and feeling is deeply connected not only to their brain activity in real time as they're thinking about stories and telling us what sense they're making of them, but it's also allowing us to literally predict the future of their brain development 2 years later when we bring them back, compared to how their brains were structured when they first came. So this is like Mary Helen's brain at age 15. Now we bring Mary Helen back at age 17, and we compare Mary Helen's brain to herself 2 years before. So we are not comparing kids to each other. We did do that, and we don't learn anything from that. There's not consistent patterns, right? There's tons of individual variability, and that's wonderful. What we see here is that there are patterns of growth that kids show relative to their earlier, younger selves that are associated with patterns of thinking and meaning making that grow the brain over time. And those patterns of growth in turn predict young adult well-being, how much young people like themselves when they're in their early 20s, how much they feel their relationships in the world around them. Just, check all the boxes of people you have in your life, your teacher at school, your parents, maybe your partner, maybe even your own child, your boss at work, your neighbor, right? How satisfied are you with the quality of emotional relationship you have with these people? How satisfied are you with these relationships? How much do you think that what you're doing with your life right now is what you always hoped for yourself, and you're really excelling at it, and it's what you really, really want to be doing? These kinds of questions are predicted by the brain development that is predicted by patterns of making emotionally engaged meaning as kids are engaging with these stories. Let me give you a sense of what those patterns are. But before we do that, I'm just going to show you just very quickly a tour of the brain. These are data from adults, so we did this with first, as it works for us too, and just showing some of the big neural centers that are deeply engaged when people are thinking about things that matter to them. So you're seeing two slices through one person's brain. One, you see the nose over here, the tongue, the spinal cord. This is that so-called reptilian brain. It's the brain's stem. It sits between the cortex, and the subcortex and the spinal cord, which goes out to your face and body and back, right? So it's really the bottleneck that allows your brain to connect with your body and your body to connect with your brain. It's essential for survival and operates happily for those of us who forget to do stuff, right? Like breathe. It operates between the level of your cortex and your body, so you don't have to think about making it go. And then on the right, you see a slice of the brain this way, turned up. So this is the forehead, the back of the head. And so what do we see? Emotionally engaged thinking activates brain systems that keep us alive. So this is a statistical map of the systems of the brain that are systematically more active, sucking up more blood and glucose and oxygen when people tell us that they are deeply engaged with what they're thinking about, that it really matters to them, as compared to things that they say, aren't that important, or they're kind of done thinking about, or that they find sort of boring. And so what do we see? Brainstem activity. So this is the medulla down here. This is right above the spinal cord. If you get damage in here, you get things like persistent vegetative state, coma. Down here, we can't even keep you alive on life support. Short of defibrillating your heart with every beat, you rapidly become physiologically dysregulated and die. I mean, how powerfully does this speak to our engaged thinking actually engaging the way in which we feel and experience our own selves? Over here, bilaterally, that means on both sides, we get massive activation in something called the anterior insula. What we know about these regions, we know a lot about them now. When we first did this experiment in 2009 with adults, what we knew is that in neurosurgeries where we're trying to control severe intractable epilepsy in the 1950s, a neurosurgeon named Wilder Penfield would put people to sleep, open up their head, then wake them back up and poke around in the part of the brain that he was going to resect to make sure that he wasn't going to remove like their ability to speak or their memory for their grandma or something, in trying to control these seizures that were ruining their life. And he kept exquisite notes of what people experienced when he poked in different places. And what he found when he poked in the anterior insula is that basically people felt nauseous, or they vomited, or they got other kinds of gastromotoric distress, which, I won't describe in polite company. These are visceral somatomotor cortices. These are the parts of the brain that literally feel and play out what's going on in the internal body and your heartbeat when you're running up the stairs and all these kinds of things. And what we showed was that these systems are repurposed in the service of thinking. So the very same brain systems that allow you to know you're frightened, or allow you to know that your lunch is not sitting well with you, also let you think, wow, this is fascinating math. Let me keep going to solve this problem. Or gosh, that's immoral. I don't agree with what's going on, right? These kinds of judgments are literally tied to gut feelings, but we build out our ability to have gut feelings through experience. So you don't it's not intuitive like we think of in society, where a gut feeling is something you don't have to learn. What we've shown is that learning technical domains actually allows you to connect those patterns of thinking to emotional ways of caring about stuff. When you talk to teachers and ask you, why do you do your work, right? I guarantee there's going to be something in there that has to do with the deep emotional connection you feel to the purpose of that work. That is you playing out your expertise in the constructs of the brain that actually allow you to stay alive. It becomes part of who you are and how you live to be able to know and think things. The anterior middle cingulate is like the center of the brain, right? It's like a central hub of connectivity where networks from across the brain are passing through there to go to other places. It sits right between the two anterior insula, and together with the anterior insula, it makes something that scientists call the salience network. So these are networks of regions that are the guts, the viscera, the physiological orienting towards things that matter. Like, oh my God, there's a bus about to hit me. Like, step off the sidewalk, right? Or like, oh, everything's good. I can stop and think about what really matters here, which is, that I don't agree with this pattern of action, or there's a historical precedent, or possible future things. And so what we also find is that certain kinds of brain activity are activated for only certain kinds of emotional thinking. And this turns out to be very important for educators, I think, and for the way we understand the learning process itself. And these are regions of the brain that, previous to our experiment and others, we called the default mode network because a guy named Marcus Rakel and his colleagues at University of Washington in St. Louis had done this very clever experiment where they gave people lots of things to look at in the MRI scanner, words to read, babies crying, pornography, like all kinds of stuff, and just watched what happened to the brain when people gave you stimuli, so to speak. And there was a hypothesis at that time, and this was only like 2001, that if we were to ask people to lay in the scanner and just relax, think about nothing, and give them just a blank screen to stare at, right? That the brain would sort of be, kind of omnipotentiated. It would just sort of be background level activity waiting for something to happen, right? The kind of the way your computer hard drive is when you're not putting any tasks on it. And that is not at all what they found when they did an experiment where they asked people to do a really hard task where they had to pay attention, right? It was called the end-back task, where you memorize what came before and keep reporting if it came 2 or 3 times before, and you see the picture again and all that. And then just relax, think about whatever, don't, just daydream. And what they found is that these massive activations were happening in the core of the head in these regions that we know are among the most metabolically expensive in the whole of the human body. So underneath this spot here, way back in the middle of the back of your head, is one of the regions that uses so much glucose and oxygen per unit time. It uses more in the same amount of time for the same amount of tissue than your thigh muscle does in the middle of running a marathon for the same size of muscle, right? So just daydreaming is using more glucose and oxygen per unit size of tissue than your thigh muscle in the middle of a marathon. What does that tell us about what's going on when we are not being asked to respond and quote unquote do mental work? What we found is that, and now many, many experiments have shown this in various ways, these systems aren't the default in the sense that they do nothing sort of waiting there for stuff to come in. The human being is constantly making meaning. We're thinking about memories. We're imagining futures. We're playing out hypotheticals. We're wondering, that guy at work, I wonder if he's mad at me. Or, geez, I wonder I could do it this way if that would work. Or next week it's my grandma's birthday. I wonder if she'd like flowers or if I should take her out to lunch, right? Playing out these possible things that don't actually exist in the real world. And that turns out to be a core piece of the brain's activity profile and also of learning that I think our school designs have overlooked, and in fact, in many cases, under supported and even punished. Daydreaming, thinking about big ideas, taking time to slow down and really reflect on the meaning of things and make sense out of it in your own way turns out to be key for brain development, for well-being, and also for learning. So let's just look at what we would have seen Acela say when she saw the story of Pakistan, right? And this girl who can't go to school. She says, this story makes me feel upset. How she wants to be a doctor, continue with her education, but it makes her sad. Knowing her journey would be very difficult, right? I colored that yellow because that is her showing us, she knows what happened in the story and she has a direct reaction to that story that makes sense. It's sad and she feels bad for her, and that's very legitimate. And kids who did a lot of that had a lot of friends. They accepted diversity well. They weren't in trouble. They were doing well. But kids could also, and all of them did to varying degrees, engage in a different kind of meaning making, which we called transcendent meaning making that went beyond that story to try to figure out what it means for the world more broadly, for them personally, for the possible things that could exist, for the ways that things are operated, for the intentions behind things. She says, it's powerful, right? There's something bigger than just this girl's story here, is what she's telling us. She says, it makes me think about my own journey in education and how I want to go to college and hopefully be a scientist someday, right? She's taking that girl's story and now playing it out, just like my little nephew with with looking at the mirror. She's playing it out on her own sense of self, her own story, and seeing the similarities. And then she says, even more, I guess what really hits me is how not everyone's able to get this chance to go forward with their life and get an education or do what they want to do. It's not right. right? She takes something that is just like, well, I feel bad for her, to like, wait a minute, I'm learning something about what's existing in the world and making a moral judgment about that. I guess when I think more, it makes me feel upset that others live in certain parts of the world where they don't want people to learn. They're trying to hold them back. But all these by the way, are related to default mode activity in the brain. We've shown that. Her story inspires me, right? We get this secondary sense of self and potentiated self, where I'm like, feel like I could do things that are meaningful, to work harder, right? I could prevent those things from happening. Maybe everyone everywhere should have the chance. I mean, all human beings should be able to live free and choose their life future. She goes from this story about that girl makes me sad for her to all human beings should, right? That process we call transcendent, because she's moving from a direct empathic reaction that's context dependent to something that is invented in her own mind that goes with her wherever. It's something that moves through time and helps her learn something about herself, about the world, and what's possible. That kind of thinking is the kind of thinking that we think schools need to be really promoting and supporting in systematic ways. So what we see in the brain is that we get a kind of a toggling back and forth. Nothing sloshing around in the head, I just want to be clear. But the way that networks are activating and deactivating is that the salience network, which is really your guts, your viscera, the feeling of being me, is being used to kind of decide, what kind of attention should I pay here? Should I tip over into the executive control network and pay attention and move my pencil on the paper and learn what's being said and memorize it and spit it back and like 1, 2, 3, all eyes on me, and I need to finish in 45 minutes, which is very important for learning? Or, and this is the part where we often don't spend enough time thinking strategically about how to allow for and even support this in school, can I switch back? Because what matters here is a bigger idea, right? Rolling this ball down this ramp in physics class isn't just about measuring the ball and timing it and getting the right answer and calculating this thing we're calling the constant of gravity. It's actually about measuring this like hidden force that's everywhere all the time, that all matter is sucking onto itself, and it's the thing that's holding my feet on the ground and making the moon make tides and also making this ball roll, and I can actually make an apparatus that I could use to figure out how strongly it's pulling on me and the ball and everything being on the world through this experiment. That leap to the concept of gravity takes a kind of emotional safety, because you have to be able to let go of paying attention to what's out here, wondering what people are thinking about you, paying attention to the teacher giving instructions, and instead think for a few minutes about, like, what is the big idea? And people even roll their eyes back, they close their eyes when they're thinking. It's like, don't give me stuff in front of me, I need to construct ideas in my mind. That kind of thinking is key for education. So I'm going to take you just very quickly. We have papers showing that that kind of thinking actually grows the physical connections of the brain over time in ways that produce life satisfaction in young adulthood. And I'm just going to wrap up with an example of what we think this looks like in a math classroom, for example. So this young man is in a school, an alternative school system, where he is being asked to learn math for the first time. And the way the teachers have built the curriculum, they engage the students in big mathematical problems that get them really interested in big ideas, and then work backward from that. And the teachers, there's a video of this you can find online easily. It's published in our 2020 paper in Ed Leadership if you want to go find the video that way. The teachers explain how they rope kids in, they entice them with big ideas that they find powerful, and then help them connect mathematical computation to that. So this is the last day of class where this young man is explaining what it's meant to him to learn math in this way. And I want you to listen for these patterns of attention and engagement. Where is he attending to doing things, and where is he attending to ideas? And he's moving himself back and forth between these two ways of thinking. And that's key, because if we try to give kids like a 5-minute, this is our reflection time and you have to do it now, that's fine, that's okay, that's good. But like, this is actually not something you can do for someone. It's like a muscle, our data suggests. You have to decide for yourself, wait a minute, I don't get this. Let me step back and make sense of this. Or wait a minute, I've got this idea. Let me dig in and try and work it out. So let's watch what he says. He says, I want to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, but I never even imagined I could reach that level of math. Math at my school has helped me to learn mathematically, right? These process-oriented ways of thinking. Learn how to think outside the box in different strategies. When I was given a problem, I had to think in a new way and research ideas I don't know before, right? He's talking about the way in which he's thinking, not what he can do. I've spent 2 months working on a problem called walking to the door. That's Zeno's paradox, right? You get halfway to the door. Do you ever get to the door? Why or why not, right? He says, it led me, it took me somewhere. It led me to think about limits and the idea of asymptotes. I had to study fractions, right? I had to study fractions to think about the idea I had, the problem I had. Through doing the problem, I got fascinated by finite and infinite. I was able to connect it to my life, right? I would argue that the idea of asymptotes is not, super relevant for some random kid's life, except it becomes so because he feels himself engaging as him, engaging that guts and viscera as he's doing his mathematical thinking. And what happens as he's tipping back and forth is he's engaging the feeling of him, which is the connection, it's the relevance, it's what's making the learning powerful. So I'm just going to skip ahead to the end here. And this stuff is available in other places. I can send it to it. But what we really are showing is that meaningful learning shifts teachers and students from emotions that are mainly about the outcomes, the results, what can you do, what did you do, please do this, I have to chase you around and make you do this, right? To emotions that are mainly about the ideas, gravity, asymptotes. That's why we're doing these things. Social justice, that's why history matters, right? When we engage in big ideas, that is deeply, powerfully meaningful to kids, and it's an entree point for them to practice leveraging skills in the service of building their brains and their minds and their sense of self. I want to thank our funders. You can follow us and get more information, and thank you. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to invite the panelists to talk a little bit about some of how they have been engaging with our and other science that leads us into these more open-ended ways of engaging with information that really invite kids to feel and think and build themselves. I wonder if we should take down the slides and not spotlight one person now, but have all of the teachers. Okay. So for the first question for the panel, as an educator, you've been engaging with some of the research that I have shared. How can you just give us a sense of how that research has mattered to you? What does it mean to you in the context of your practice? I'm going to first call on Sam to start.
Great. Thank you so much. I actually had not heard of this research specifically until about a year ago or so. And one thing I was surprised to find is that it was very fortunately in alignment with a lot of the things I learned in my teacher preparation program, which really focused on building students' identities as doers of science and providing opportunities, instructional tasks, and more casual learning opportunities as well for them to really take on ownership over their learning, which helps them find purpose and direction in the equations that they're learning, which as a high school chemistry teacher, that is all we can hope for, is that these very niche equations become meaningful to students' lives. As you mentioned before, learning and applying really challenging things takes emotional safety. And so those culture building practices are most definitely an important part of that on the front end, especially and throughout the year. But more recently, in connecting my teacher preparation program with this research, the idea that has resonated with me is that very similar to how people don't really take advice until they need it. I found with chemistry that students don't often apply things until they realize they need it. And so my job
Exactly.
as a
Exactly.
teacher is to create opportunities for them to need it, whether that's
Totally.
through something that identifies with their personal lives or with something going on in the, global world. And so I think that's kind of been my recent challenge is how do I keep adapting my instruction to match opportunities for them to be like, oh, I need an equation or I need an explanation that shows me how to do this specific thing.
Absolutely. Amen to that. Matthew, do you want to tag on?
Yeah, no, definitely a lot of similar to what Sam was saying, but for me, I think the biggest thing has been, as a social studies teacher, it's validated the social responsibility that I feel like I have to educate my students in a way that's, not just remembering dates and presidents and where countries are on a map, but to actually really think about who they are as citizens and how they contribute to society and how the things that are going on in the world around them, affect them even at this young age. And so I think for me, it's one of those things where my goal is to just encourage them to explore the world around them and not to think of social studies as something that is only in the past, right? Or not even only in the present, but also how can they use these things to examine their own futures.
Mm-hmm. Pete?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a school principal, and I was a science teacher for about 10 years. And I first became aware of your work and this work in general through a kind of meta study called How People Learn. And we read that as a staff, and I remember feeling really moved by the idea that that learning is what resonated most is that learning is at its core an emotional experience,
I
and with
wrote that. Yeah,
and
go ahead.
and
Yeah.
without that, and without that the emotion, the information that comes into your brain and as it is pulled out of your brain, it sort of gets marked by an emotional tag.
Right.
And that resonated very deeply because I think that fundamentally my job is to kind of cultivate and kind of foster an environment in which children feel safe and comfortable, and that they feel cared for. And then as a result of that, they're able to take greater risks
Yep.
and also build a kind of connection and experience a kind of connectedness. And there's a kind of a loop that gets established that really is like a fundamental foundation for learning. Without that, it's not that I guess the important thing also is that there is no learning. There's never a emotion-free learning
No.
experience. And so our
Yeah.
job is to think about what is the emotional experience of the child.
Exactly. One of the ways I sometimes think about is to tell to educators, think to yourself, we so much think about what emotions there are in the classroom, excitement, frustration, and those are relevant. But I would say what we've forgotten to think about, which is potentially even more relevant and even more fundamental, is not as much what emotions are there, but what are the emotions about? Because if you think about it, what you're having emotion about is what you're thinking about. And what you're
Uh,
thinking about, you could be learning about. So what are you having emotions about? If the emotions are about how I might fail or I'm an A plus or like, any of those like sort of outcome measures, that's okay to a degree. But then that means that that's what you're learning about. If you want to learn about chemistry or social studies or any topic, then the emotions have to be about that. Wait, you're telling me there's
yeah.
infinity? What a concept, right? You're telling me that lead in the water could be, we could study that using chemistry and then we could figure out what happened in Flint. Wow, right? Teach me some more chemistry, please, right? I have something to say about the foster care system and, like teach me again how I write a topic sentence because I need people to understand what I want to say, right? It's that need because need is basically emotion, right? Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you now, what's a shift in your practice or the practices of your colleagues that you've noticed that you think really matters for more meaningful student learning? What is one thing that you think really can really contribute to this shift? I'm going to start with you, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the shift in relevance and identifying those two different types of relevance, that's what stuck with me in my
Mm,
work with Candle, the small R relevance and the big R relevance.
yeah.
So, it's important for students to understand that small R relevance in terms of what is kind of the initial immediate utility of what they're learning.
Exactly. Yeah.
But then how do we get them to understand and to see the big R relevance, which is that long-term impact that it's going to have on their life. And that's where I think a lot of the personal connections and a lot of the emotion, to your point, comes from when students see, oh, this thing that I'm learning about that happened, 100 years ago or 150 years ago still explains the things that I'm seeing in the world today in terms of injustices or
Yeah.
disparities, or something as simple as like why I live in this neighborhood compared to this other neighborhood.
Yeah. Yeah. Samantha?
Yeah. I think for me, related to designing relevant and emotion provoking instruction, one thing that has been a helpful transition, and it's kind of come in these last few years, is rather than centering a specific content standard, trying to reorient my practice to center one of our like science cross-cutting skills, whether it's like arguing a point using evidence or pattern recognition. And when I have centered my lessons on like the goal of this is to develop pattern recognition skills so that my students can then go out in the world and apply this to maybe more exciting problems than whatever we happen to be doing that day. I found that it's not only given my students a sense of purpose and direction, but it's helped me kind of frame that storyline or the arc in my instruction rather than trying to take disconnected and disparate pieces of knowledge and connect them all together. It's been a little more effective framing it based off practices.
Mm-hmm. That's a great insight. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think about in terms of shifts, like I was having a conversation with a staff member, a teacher recently, and like sharing feedback from a lesson observation, and the 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 teacher had designed a lesson, like a good lesson, but they were going from bite-sized information, slightly larger bites into then larger long-term problem. It was a math class, and it had a certain thing that I call it like a gatekeeper kind of a lesson where
Absolutely.
you got to do this thing. Once you've done that thing, you can do that thing. And then we can get you to the kind of mathematical reasoning and fun problem solving where you'll talk to your classmates. And I just suggested to her, why not just flip that entirely? Have the kids start out by playing and talking to one another because they have enough skill developed. These are 11th grade students. They understand the concepts broadly. So you should be playing first. That to me would have the kids caring about their understanding, developing and deepening relationships and using that connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
And then the teacher can understand from that conversation what elements may be missing in terms of procedural understanding or whatever the case may be. So those kinds of things have really been helpful, right? Like thinking about like what comes first, what kind of really simple
Yes.
shift can we make that actually is not leads to a very complex result.
A very complex result. I love that. I'm going to give a little story of my own kid. So this is Teddy. When he was in like sixth grade-ish, he had the weird fortune of going to this tiny little free micro school, which was built in a factory, and it was all about the industrialization of things and building and measuring, and it was a lot of technical stuff, but also a lot of humanities and arts. They had a course called Synthesis and Reflection, which was about what does all this mean for society when we invent things and all this stuff. So here's my little torpy sixth grader who it was all mixed grades and like kids from all ages, 6 to 14 in a class. And very unusual thing. But they taught math in exactly the way you were saying, Peter. So there were kids who were 9 doing calculus. My son was not one of those, right? But they threw them in and they taught them all this kind of math, but they had a whole class just on mathematical thinking and a class on calculating, and the calculating was titrated to their tests, right? So they would give them tests on what they knew and then they work on it. So here's my kid. He's coming out of a public school where it's a much more standard curriculum, a very good quality neighborhood public elementary. About halfway through the year, he was struggling. He was trying to take these. They would have assessments every Friday, and he's like sitting there the night before trying to really think about, everything that was going to be on the test, and he's trying to memorize all of it to make sure he knows all of it. And it's like, that is not what those tests were for. And I remember sitting with him at 9 p.m. before a test and be like, honey, you can't learn all of physics by tomorrow morning. Like, you're only 10. Like, it's okay. You're going to learn this. Like, other kids have been learning this for a long time. The point is not to go there and already know everything, right? The point is to know there and see what you can do. And like that orientation to the assessment process. So fast forward to after Christmas, his first year. This was not a kid who ever put his work up or something. He discussed what he was learning, all these things, but we never quite knew what his grades were. Like, that just didn't matter to him, but he was deeply engaged. He puts this math test up on the refrigerator, which is not like him to do. And I look at it and it says 50%. And it's all marked up with red by his teacher all over it and whatever. And I'm like, okay. So I go over to Ted and I'm like, hey, Ted, I see you put your math test up on the fridge. He's like, yeah. I'm like, I see you got a 50%. He's like, yeah, I got it half right. And then he's like, want me to show you? And he takes it down. He's like, you see this? Well, my teacher said this is calculus. I don't know how to do that, but I just took all these little boxes and added them all together, and I got something that's sort of like close to the answer. So she said I could learn more next year, but I tried. And the next thing, this I knew how to do, and I got it correct. This, he's like, the test is a game. It's like, let me see what I can do here, not like what do you already have learned, right? And the teachers can use that as a diagnostic, and the kids experience the test itself as a challenge that is deeply meaningful. Boy, he struggled with that math, but he felt smart doing it. It felt so powerful and motivating to the point where this kid puts his math test up on the fridge, right? I got it half right. You're like, wow, Okay. I'm going to take us to the next question. How do you think that teachers should be supported to do this kind of teaching and thinking about content, about rigor, about connecting daily activities to big ideas? I'm going to start with you on this one, Pete. How do you think about that? You are muted.
Sorry about that. I think that, I come from the standpoint that I believe that teachers really want to be challenging students and want to push students to kind of their next highest level of learning. And I think that's essential. I think my attitude is essential as a school leader.
Yeah.
I think that, it's important also to give teachers, to make teachers students of their craft, and in a way kind of have them be in their own inquiry process, right? So
Absolutely.
I like to present models, exemplars, and a kind of conundrums, so that teachers have to come together and their own connection and connectedness and try to understand what helped a particular student get to a certain outcome, what helped a particular school have a certain kind of experience. I think that what teachers are often, I think, almost like victims of policy, victims of negative media attention that kind of directs people, let's say, directs people to have to make sure that all kids reach a certain threshold at the same time. Or learn the same things, and none of which is really possible, and that's also just not really a goal. So my attitude is that our kids can do it, our kids will do it, and I really just kind of relay that to the teachers, that the teachers can do it, and the teachers will do it, but also that the teachers want to do it. That doesn't really speak to specific moves that I'm making, but that's where I'm coming from. That informs everything that I do. in cultivating teacher practice in the school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Matthew, I'm going to pass to you because I know your school is quite aligned around a shift in practice. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to work at a school that is not only project-based learning, but also uses a system known as mastery-based grading. And that is, I think, speaking to what Peter was talking about, is providing students with those opportunities to show what they know. Where, if a student takes longer to get it, they're not penalized because of all of the misses that they had beforehand. I think the best way to explain mastery-based grading is, in a traditional grading environment, if you gave a student 10 times to show you that they knew how to ride a bike, and the first 6 times they failed, and then the last 4 times they got it right, well, in a traditional grading, you'd give them a 4 out of 10, and you would say, oh, it looks like they don't know how to ride a bike. Whereas in mastery-based grading, we take those final 4 examples and we say, okay, they've shown us at the end consistently that they've learned how to do it. We saw the missteps along the way, but we're not going to weigh those equally when we know that it just shows kind of their journey. So I think that's kind of the shift that needs to happen to me, in my eyes, in a lot of schools, is how do we get away from penalizing students for making those mistakes by weighing them equally in our grading system. So I
Yeah.
think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll just add to that for those who are interested before I circle back to you, Sam, is that we have actually neuroscience research showing that kids who are in these more open-ended learning environments where they're grappling with math, this was with math problems with each other, and they're trying to solve them and stuff. For example, in the study we did was in Switzerland, in Geneva, in Montessori schools versus traditional Swiss schools. And we showed that we had 8 to 12-year-old kids who did math problems in an fMRI scanner, right? Kids from both the Montessori and the traditional schools got the same number of math problems right. So you could stop there and say, oh, everybody's learning math. Okay, that's fine. But what we found is that the Montessori kids, and this is not advocating Montessori, it's just the approach that's more open-ended. It's an example of that, right? Where they're grappling with making mistakes as part of the process rather than as a wrong or a right answer. There's no grades, right? Instead, they're meant to try to figure it out together, and the teacher's guiding them, and the materials are designed to guide them. So what we found is the Montessori kids got far more wrong because they didn't skip anything they weren't sure of. They gave it a whirl and they tried it. And then the brain activity showed us that after they got it wrong, they were showing all that anterior cingulate, was connecting to math processing in their right parietal lobe, we think, and frontal lobes, like strategic, like, oh, really? That's wrong? Okay, I'm going to think about that. And then they were more likely to get it right the next time, right? Whereas the traditionally schooled kids, when they got it wrong, they freaked out. They paused for a longer time. And when they finally got over their freak out fit, we saw nothing in the brain that showed constructive learning from that. And they were just as likely to get it wrong again the next time, right? And what we also showed and found is that over time, the Montessori pattern of learning, where kids were just giving it a whirl and trying and then getting it wrong and then being like, oh, that's interesting, right? They learned more overall across the experiment, right? And we also showed that with the traditionally schooled kids, when they got something correct, that's when they showed all the brain activity. They're like, oh, quick, memorize that, right? We see that part of the brain talking to the anterior hippocampus, which is long-term memory. They're like, store that answer, that's correct, right? As compared to, figuring it out, right? Where the Montessori kids got the thing correct. They were like, oh, yeah, right, yeah, keep going. I thought so. Yeah, not that interesting to get it right, Sam?
Yeah. You guys' responses were really interesting to me because I have taught in 2 very traditional settings, and so I feel like I've had to like carve out space to allow for students to have more kind of like exploratory thinking and even to like redesign exactly like what you were mentioning, like what I reward and what I respond to.
Yes.
Because in my 10 years of teaching, there's sort of, even as I've designed other tasks and given grades for other types of assessments, like my schools have still expected kind of an end of unit, some sort of way to prove mastery. But I think there's a lot that teachers can do leading up to that, like you guys mentioned earlier, change how students approach a test. And it's like an opportunity to be challenged. But along the way, it's a safe learning environment. They've been able to work together in groups. They've been able to apply these skills kind of one step at a time to a purpose or a task that's meaningful to them. So as far as teacher support goes, I think Pete, maybe you mentioned this. Sometimes teachers just need to be reminded that like this is not, you do not have to teach a certain way. And even if you're in a traditional structure, how can you get creative within that to sort of coach and support students on their way to mastery? And how can you as a teacher, either through your grading policies or just through how you are in your classroom, reward some of those more exploratory efforts rather than just like what's right and what's wrong? Yeah, my initial response to this, I was just thinking through my teacher prep program, like I was trying so hard to make every lesson relevant and purposeful for students, which is great in effort, but sometimes exhausting and sometimes you feel
Yes.
defeated when you can't find a great like storyline to do that. Um, but now that I've been in it a little longer and I feel like I know my context pretty well, I feel like for teachers who have been in the game, they know their students so well. And sometimes supporting teachers just looks like what you mentioned, Pete, of like going in the classroom and saying, what you have is already great. Try
Hmm.
flipping this instead.
Hmm.
Or how can you create an opportunities for students to explore or to play with this idea rather than showing them right away a sort of an assessment type of task. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Love that. Love that. And I think you've already dealt with some of this question, but I'm going to give Matthew and Pete the chance to also add on. How do you handle the tension that can exist? I think Sam was just speaking to this. How do you handle the tension that can exist between mandates that are external to your classroom and policies and tests and doing what you think is best for the students developmentally in the moment, right? So how do you navigate that? Because that's a real skill, right? That's something that Sam's talking about having really built up an ability for over a lot of experience. So how do you think about that? I'm going to start with you, Matthew.
Yeah, I mean the tensions are very real for my school in terms of, being a hybrid independent study charter school. There's a lot of scrutiny on charter schools in general and also independent study schools. So I think the biggest thing is looking at what are all of the different avenues in which we can determine student progress and showcase student
Mm,
progress, and what does that look like with things like presentations of learning or
hmm.
student-led conferences, things that are student-driven,
Yeah.
where we really give them the ability to advocate for themselves what they've learned, and not make assumptions that the only way that students can show what they've learned is their score on a test, right? Or what
Hmm.
this national, exam says that they're at in terms of their reading or math levels. Not to say that those things aren't important or aren't
Hmm.
valuable, but I think those things often kind of strip away the context
Yeah.
of the students. And as was mentioned in my bio earlier, is the students we serve are at-risk youth, that have a lot of things that they are bringing with them to our school, that don't get seen or are sometimes
Hmm.
seen as markers against them.
Hmm.
And so, us as a school, one of our priorities is how can we allow students to demonstrate their learning in ways that are
Hmm.
unconventional, but
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah. Very valuable. And then kids can find their way back into the more standardized metrics over time as they get confidence, right? Pete?
I think there's like a multi-pronged answer for me. I am I think uniquely very lucky in that I work in a school that's a member of the New York Performance Standards Consortium. And for those who don't know who we are, like the consortium negotiated with New York State close to 30 years ago to earn a waiver from using the Regents exams, which are, single high stakes exams across the major subjects. And so with that waiver, we've been given a certain kind of protection, a certain kind of freedom to develop a unique assessment model. And so there's a certain amount of work that's been done by leaders who are brilliant, and there's legal, there are lawyers involved as well. So I work in a somewhat protected environment. That said, I've had to fight many battles with my own superintendents and other folks around many of the practices that still remain either unconventional or represent a way of thinking that is not really accepted by the mainstream. And I'd say that what I'm doing actively is I think what Samantha described in the schools that you've worked in is carving out a niche. And I'm part of a group of school leaders that actively and collaboratively and cooperatively carve out this niche within the New York City Department of Education and then within the New York State Education Department. Um, I do that, and then I don't talk about it at all with the teachers at the school because I don't want it to be on their minds. I want them to have freedom to do the work that is the good work. And then we talk amongst ourselves about how to make that the best it can be. We borrow from great folks like Mary Helen and other people who are pointing the way. I'm a part of a good and supportive team. I'm lucky in, again, also being in New York City because it is such an enormous system. You know, we have until recently about 1 million students in this single district in New York City, about 1,600 schools, or it's give or take at any moment. So we can kind of hide in this huge, vast sea of students and educational policy. What we've also done is when there are mandates, because we have some collective power, we push back collectively against the mandate. So there was a math curriculum mandated for all of New York City high schools. And we pushed back and we said we've been working on and actively develop our own assessment model. We would like to tell you what it is and have our own way of working on it, right? And so as the result of developing, connections and alliances over time, we were given audience with decision makers and have, again, carved out our own niche with regard to mathematics, and we'll continue to do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Are there others who'd like to speak to that question? Matthew? No? I think
I think I already responded to that
pretty
question.
much responded to it. Yeah. Okay. So I think the last question I'll ask is about if you could just give an example of the kind of a learning experience that a student or a group of students might have in your class or your school or in the teachers that you mentor or administrate that you think would be conducive to this kind of developmental approach, this kind of journey-like experience of thinking and this invitation to transcendent meaning making. So, Sam, I'm going to call on you.
Yeah. The example that came to mind came from, I think, my second or third year of teaching. So truly just still trying to get my sea legs under me. My principal asked me to sit down as science department chair and write a lesson that aligned with the International Baccalaureate kind of framework, which is very immersive and kind of getting students to apply all these ideas across the storyline in line with what we've been talking about today. And I was so frustrated that I had to do it. It was all day Saturday. But as I was sitting there thinking about my upcoming unit, it was on chemical bonding, so ionic, covalent bonds, polar, nonpolar, all that sort of stuff. I don't know if it was recently on my mind or how it came to be. Maybe I saw like something on Netflix, but I started thinking about the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And so out of that came this whole storyline of how could students use the knowledge of chemical bonding to design a device that could clean up this massive oil spill, or since then, now that so much time has passed, like smaller oil spills that we've seen in rivers and lakes. And so throughout that, we looked at news clippings and what happened to gas prices, what happened to the Gulf community. And then they were able to design a device and they made a poster about it. And then I actually had this extra day, I'll never forget it, of school where like I could not make a lesson plan. I was exhausted. And so I talked to the PE teacher and I said, hey, can my students come and put their posters around the gym? And then can you have your PE classes come and vote on the posters. And my kids are going to stand there and they're going to present their ideas, kind of like a Shark Tank-esque moment. And then whoever gets the most votes, I forget, I think I gave them, some extra credit or some bonus points, or they got to present in front of everybody. But the administration came down. We had 200 or 300 students in the gym all going around to these posters that the activity sort of just came out of thin air. But I started taking pictures of the day because I just have never seen my students so excited to share this knowledge that they had been developing over time. And a lot of adults that came down and watched were like, these kids need to submit this to some sort of science contest. Like, they're so passionate about it. A lot of them brought down some of the things that we had been experimenting with in the class to be like, look, like the duck feathers, they really work to absorb the oil. And so I still use that project to this date, but I will never forget the first time that it ran, because I didn't know if it was going to work at all, and to see the kids take ownership of it. And the Gulf is not even really our local community in Nashville, but to have a real world problem that they could apply what they were learning to, and they felt like they could really make a difference. That's left a lasting impression with me. So
That's cool. Matthew?
Yeah, so in my work with Candle over this past school year, I developed a project as an example of pursuing transcendent thinking with my students. So the project was about the social contract, and getting students to understand this concept of how we in societies choose to give up our individual freedoms in order to receive a collective security amongst ourselves. And so I had students engage in different case studies where we would look at different examples of how the social contract is seen in their lives, in the ways that they interact with the world. And so I started by giving students kind of a questionnaire where they were presented with different situations that they had to make a choice, A or B, and those choices would represent either a choice for more security or for more freedom. And so that allowed students to kind of have a baseline of what they value in their own lives. And so after that, we had students explore different case studies, talk about things like freedom of speech versus censorship. We did a case study on the right to bodily autonomy versus public health mandates. And, there I talked about students' personal experiences with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so, it was really a unit that was built entirely on students' understanding of what they value in their own lives. How much value do they place in having the freedom to do whatever they want versus what is the security that they experience that they may not even realize exists, as a result of them giving up their own personal liberties. And so it was the unit, I think, promoted a lot of that transcendent thinking, or at least that early transcendent thinking that I wanted students to engage with. But it was also an opportunity for me to engage in my own thinking and understanding of, I went into the unit thinking that students were going to value freedom almost entirely, just based on conversations and knowing my students, and knowing really young people in general and how they want to kind of, they're always like, let me just do whatever I want, say whatever I want, be out as late as I want. And so it was a learning experience for me as well, to see students really place a lot of value in security, in understanding why there exist things like, health mandates and curfews and limitations on freedom of speech. And so, I think what came out of that project was a lot of really good work by the students, but also a lot of learning that I got to experience as their teacher.
I think a lot of the kids, did they express having changed their mind? Like, I
Yes.
remember reading some of those kids' answers and being like, I didn't realize I actually value this so much, or I always assumed I would think this, but when I actually go look at the choices, I guess I'm more conservative than I thought, or
Yeah.
I'm more liberal than I thought, right? They changed their minds. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things came to mind when I looked at the question, but I was recently sat on a presentation panel. So when our kids finish their PBATs, which are their graduation requirements, they do an oral presentation and defense. And so a student was presenting their project for their neuroscience class, and it was an investigation into how like a very quick priming can shift bias. And so the student had selected a set of images, or basically like shots of a face, essentially, across gender, ethnicity. I think they were kind of like computer generated images, and there were three groups, right? One group was primed by something that I think it was like a story about a story, and somebody had done something wrong, and it pointed towards a member of a group. And then another was the same story, but it just pointed towards a member of a different group. And then the control was there was no story. And the student asked the subjects to, listen or read the very brief story, and then look at the images in sequence, and then identify the image of the person that they felt was being identified, or something to that effect. And what was amazing about it was the conversation that we had, like a group of adults and two other students with this investigator, this 11th grader, about how it is we make up our minds about who a person is and how we understand who they are when we look at them, and what signals, what cues we are receiving, which we know as adults are overwhelming. Actually, as kids, they know are overwhelming. That was an incredibly rich conversation where the investigator was talking not only about the results and the data that she was analyzing, but also as she approached the design of the investigation, how often she got tripped up by her own biases in even establishing how to ask others to report on their biases with no bias obvious to anybody, right? The whole thing was her going from my experience to your experience, from my past to the future, and just a wonderful, wonderful conversation at which I think is aligned with transcendent thinking, although I'm still not quite sure.
All right, wonderful. It's great.
Uh,
Amy, yeah.
I want to thank you all. You've actually covered the questions that people have asked in the Q&A. Mary Helen, I want to know if I can put you on the spot, but you only have 3 minutes. One of the things that I think is so fascinating about the work that you do is that in addition to studying students, you also study teachers, and you also put teachers in these MRI machines. And I know you could do a whole nother, 8-hour lecture on that, but I wonder if in 3 minutes, since we have a lot of teachers on this call, you could tell us a little bit about that and what you've learned.
Yeah, okay. Well, so I'll first say we just got a paper accepted yesterday, which for academics like geeky people like me is great. And so it's going to be available very soon on teachers' narratives about their practice and the kinds of narratives that teachers are telling us that they think about and how those relate to their practices. So I think that's going to be really foundational for people to start conversations. But I think the study you want me to tell you about, Amy, is the one with the brain data, which we're just about to submit. So what we basically did, we went into schools all over the Los Angeles area in low SES areas with high proportions of kids of color, first generation immigrant kids, working class kids, and basically went into those high schools and middle schools and asked the administrators there, who are the superstar teachers, right? Who are the teachers you think really are committed to the kids really love, really learn from? And we invited 40 of those amazing people to be part of a study with us, and they all agreed and were wonderful to work with. So we did a whole bunch of things with them. We sent a team of people in to videotape their class and to observe what they were doing and to ask them about it. We also had the kids tell us what they thought about the teachers and how they experienced the classes. And we had those teachers come back to the lab with us and do a whole bunch of things, including in-depth interviews about how they understand what they're trying to do, how they understand the purpose of school, what they're trying to get in their class. And then we had them go in the MRI scanner. Well, they did a bunch of things, but one of the things they did was we had worked with them in advance to get to design an assignment for their class, one of their classes that we were observing. And the assignment was very open-ended. So it was like, this week we've been studying about, right triangles, see the causes of the Civil War, whatever it is. And like, why is that important or interesting? What have you learned? Like, explain the big idea, like very open-ended, formative assignment for students. And then we gave that to the students as an assignment. The students all did the assignment and they shunted it directly to us. And the teachers didn't get to see it until they were in the brain scanner. And then we gave it to them and said, like, here are your students' papers. So here's Amy's paper, please grade it. Here's Mary Helen's paper, please grade it, right? And here's Pete's paper, please grade it, right? And they did that while we were recording their brain activity. And then we gave them a bunch of assignments that we told them were, from kids off the internet. They were just work from off the internet and like they should just grade it. And they didn't know who the kids were. And actually, we had written those assignments to be similar to the ones from their real kids, to be matched to them, but not to be kids they actually know. And so they were grading assignments they thought were just like their kids, but they're not their kids. And we found that they graded the two consistently, right? So if they gave Mary Helen an A, they gave the fake Mary Helen that we wrote an A or a B or whatever, right? But they showed massively more brain activity to their own kids in all kinds of social and affective regions, the anterior cingulate, that region, right? And memory and self-related default mode systems, executive control systems, all those systems that we're showing in the kids are these seesawing back and forth. Those teachers were showing the same thing to their own kids. And then what we also showed, which was remarkable, is that we asked those teachers to when they came out of the scanner, we gave them a random selection of kids from their class, girls and boys, high and low performing, and said, like, can you just give open-ended feedback? Here's your student, Amy. What would you say to Amy about how she's doing if you had a meeting with her or her parents? Now, here's your student, Mary Helen, right? And we coded those, not having seen the brain data, we coded those. And what we found is that some teachers were more developmentally oriented than others. And what I mean by that, some teachers were really focused on helping the kid do the work, like saying things like, Amy, you never do your assignment. I always have to beg and push and tug on you. Like, if you need to work on your diligence in doing it, I can't do it for you, kind of thing, right? True, very true. Or like, Amy, you're an amazing student, right? Like if I asked what would be the perfect student, it would be you. And you always do what you're supposed to, and you advocate for yourself. And I think you should push yourself a little bit harder, but pretty much I think just keep doing what you're doing, right? I would call that really not developmental. That's just like feedback on the outcome, right? That's that outcome-oriented emotion. Some teachers said things like, well, Amy, I think you've got amazing ideas, and I want to see you develop your intellectual courage around sharing those ideas with your classmates, and then thinking about what perspectives could you incorporate, and then I want you to really try to share your ideas and listen to what other people are saying, and that's going to help you think more. Right? Or, well, Mary Helen, I think you hit a place, as one teacher said, where you just run out of things to think, and then you're like, I'm done, right? And what you need to do to be able to do your work better is actually learn to think more things. Well, how do you do that? Well, I think it's a skill, actually, this teacher says. Well, what you do is you start listening to other people and valuing what they're saying. And then you think about, well, what do you think about what they think? And then you answer, and then and now you're thinking things, right? And that gives you something to talk about. And so take that with you into your work. Like, start really engaging with other people and valuing what they have to say, and then valuing what you have to say, and like building out from there. Those teachers with that developmental perspective, where they're addressing the kids' propensity, capacity, dispositions in the classroom, not just what they do or don't do, those developmentally oriented teachers were the ones driving the effect. So in other words, the more developmentally oriented a teacher was, the more they focused on the journey the kid was embarking on as a learner and their capacities to engage dispositionally with their classmates and with ideas, the more difference they showed in the brain, the more increase they showed in the brain when they graded their own kids versus kids they don't know. So that's really the work of teaching, right? That's what I love about this finding, is it's like we were able to lift up and reveal what these amazing teachers know how to do, and then share that with the world in ways that we hope will really be kind of conversation starters for policymakers, for professional development, right? To really, and for teachers themselves to engage with each other and with their kids around, how do I really think about the kids in front of me and how I support them as whole people, not just to learning outcomes, right? We think of learning as the outcome of school, as the purpose of school, but it's really not the ultimate purpose of school. I would say that learning is the means. It's essential. It must happen, but it's the means to something much bigger and more important, which is development. How have you been potentiated as a human being, as a thinker, as a scholar, as a mathematician, as a scientist, as a humanitarian, as a whatever you're going to do, right? How have you been potentiated differently? How are you somebody different than you would have been? How do you feel and think differently than you would have if you had not had this opportunity to think and learn these things with these people in this way? And that's the ultimate aim we need to be asking ourselves about. Yeah.
And I can think of nothing better to end it on that, but that ultimate aim, which is always so powerful when I hear you describe it. Thank you so much. I know we have a couple more slides that we want to put up just to end this out. I really want to just thank the EAC staff, the Academy staff for all of their efforts to make this webinar possible. I want to give a special thanks to Micah Pate at the Academy for all of his work on this webinar, but also for the whole series. And really, on behalf of the EAC and the NAEd, I really want to thank the panelists for their contributions to this webinar, but more importantly, for what they do each and every day to support students. And I want to thank you all for participating. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just make this really quickly. Thank you again. That was a powerful, powerful conversation. You can see from the chat. You on the screen, you'll see a QR code. We would love to have your feedback. We will also send the recording in addition to the links of the video that did not play during the presentation. Just want to thank Mary Helen and the amazing panelists again for a great discussion. And thank you guys so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you guys with part 2. Thank you again. Bye-bye.